what a lot of people don't understand about why it's so bad, and it's not bad per se about the manga growing, because yes, people are getting stuff out of those stories, and there's no knock on that. Been getting a lot of stuff sent from you guys, which I appreciate. We got the One Piece box set, for example, that is there that we're starting to kind of go through, and that in itself, this is not a knock to this is actually more praise of the Japanese and what it is that they're doing, as opposed to an actual knock. Okay, but the reason why it's so bad is because this is a recent phenomenon. I don't think a lot of people understand it. People that have maybe always read manga don't seem to understand that, but it is an absolutely recent phenomenon as far as manga destroying, just absolutely destroying comic books in the West. I'm not talking about, and particularly America, but I'm not talking about obviously in Japan. You expect all of that out there to be what folks generally consume, but that has not been the case out West. So, the big news came out in the past, let's say, that was in April sales, right? When you saw the books, the book scans, and you saw that in the top 20 adult graphic novels, manga represented literally all of them. There was no American comic books that were there. It was just strictly manga. That's a recent phenomenon. For example, if you go a year back, if you go even a year back, like back in May, and you go look at those same numbers, you had say the guy's an idiot, but George Takei had dropped his little book. You had Watchmen. All of that stuff was in the top 20, right? All of those were in the top 20. Though, yes, manga, of course, represented it. I mean, the further you go back, the further manga, at least out here, was not in the top 20, not necessarily not in the top 20 sales, but obviously it was more representation in terms of the American deal. That is a more so when we talk about the last few years, that's more so when this started to happen, like in the where we're at now, where there is no American representation in the top 20. That is a recent phenomenon. And this is why it's so bad, right? Because you can't even rely upon this idea that, all right, let's just backtrack just a little bit before I make that point. It's American comic books. It's embedded in American culture. And the characters that are generally associated with DC and Marvel are part of American culture. People, for example, know who Batman is, know who Superman is, know who Spider-Man is, despite never reading books. It is embedded in American culture. And for the outsiders, if you will, to come in and in a prime era of this sort of material, because if you know how kind of the Japanese and how that culture works in terms of people buying the manga, it's a cool kind of relationship, because quite often people can get sold, like with anime, for example. People that watch anime can get sold on the manga by watching the anime, and some people vice versa. Where that's not necessarily, though it should be the case with American comic books, it's not the case. The animation, the live actions, which over the past 10 years have been through the roof, constant billion dollar movies, blockbusters, and they aren't equaling comic book sales. So what happened is that genre, what we're talking about is basically comic books, is something that people are thirsting for, but they're not necessarily being provided with work that they would generally consume and find tolerable. That was not always the case. So a lot of the arguments that the American comic pros, for example, piracy, people won't accept new characters. All those questions have been answered by the Japanese. They show that all of that's just griping and complaining because you're not putting out work that people want to buy. So it grew in the West. It grew out in America, especially over the last, let's say if you go half decade, it exploded, and people wanted to buy manga. that demand continued to increase to the point where we're at now. And it's simply what most people that are looking for comic book related material, they prefer manga right now in America and in the West. That obviously should have never happened, considering that when you got Marvel and DC first in best dress and in combination with what they've been able to do over the last 10 years. But this goes back to what we've said before about the subject matter. And that is that comic pros will never concede that they suck. They can't do that. They can't possibly look at a world in which they are not good at what it is that they're doing. So they're not putting out work that people want. And again, it's not that there are folks that don't like, oh, people grew out of this. No, it is embedded in American culture. And there are a lot of people that would love to get in the comic books. But the big two particularly, which have basically dominated the comic book space, though that is changing. That I feel like there's going to be a cultural revolution here. And we'll save that for a different segment. But manga's growing in the West, American, and it's mainly it's not just because they're putting out solid work. Obviously, that's the thing. It's that they're filling a void that simply is not being that is more so left by way of the American big two, mainly comic book pros, where they prefer to focus more really on everything else aside from world building and what made comic books in America special. And the guys over and definitely the Japanese have said, we'll provide it. Here you go. And people consume it. And that's a credit to them. But I think a lot of folks that, and this is more to the folks that are more familiar with manga, don't seem to understand. As a matter of fact, we can kind of pull this up like I was talking about. Let's see. I'm going to show you right now. So if you look at, for example, with the the NBD book scan data, for example, this is a year ago. So this is March 2020. For example, this is where you saw obviously a lot of them dominating manga, but even a year ago, the number one selling in March, the number one selling adult graphic novel was Strange Planet, which I have. And obviously you have The Watchmen, which is here. What else is here as far as American comic book stuff? Oh yeah, that George Takei deal that I was talking about. Lock and Key. Like there were obviously things that people were consuming that were you at least had some American representation. That has been entirely wiped now. Now there's none. If you looked at the recent data, it was just straight manga. It was just straight manga. So again, this last decade, which should have been a time where you think American comic book should be at its peak because the media that people are making should be getting people enthusiastic about it. But that's not how it's happening. And again, don't blame the customers. The customers have shown you, because they're buying manga, that they want that material. They want comic book material. Like, it's not that they won't read it. It's not that they don't want it. It's that they're providing a better product. And this is why I say constantly that we are in much need of a American cultural revolution, and we're getting one. You're seeing a lot of independent guys that are starting to pop up, but not independent just for the sake of being independent. Because what made Marvel and what made DC special again is the worlds that these characters exist in, and of course they're connected. And a lot of even independent folk lose sight of that as far as getting people enthusiastic about it. But you're starting to see a trend there. And these American comic book pros are the ones that are getting the jobs by way of Marvel and DC, and they're running them bad boys into the ground because they're more let's be honest, they care more about what kind of social or Instagram statement that they can make with their book as opposed to writing material for your general comic book audience. Hell, in a lot of cases, like it with Kelly Sue DeConnick and the likes, they'll insult the customers. Like, you have to live up to their expectations, not the other way around. You're not even a customer. You're just a person that's getting in on something it is that they're writing. And the market has spoken. The market has spoken. Where you get something, where you're generally going to get it late anyway, where you're getting something that is from the other side of the damn planet, that are doing comic book material, albeit different. You know, reading from the other way around. A lot of it's not in color. It's different. But people are saying that they would rather go consume that than what's here and what has been dominating their culture. So what that does, it's not that it speaks to how good that the the Japanese comics are in the manga. It speaks to how bad of a place that American comic books are right now. Now, they'll never concede that, and this is why the problem will never get corrected. They'll blame everything else but themselves. Marvel and DC, you are hiring people that have absolutely no fucking idea what it is that they're doing, and the market is telling you that. But if you want to keep listening to your diversity departments and your HR departments, by all means, do that, and manga will continue to dominate you. You just watched a clip from our podcast, For Canon's Sake. Catch us live at 12 p.m. throughout the week over at youtube.com/YoungRipper59 and follow us over at odyssey.com/@YoungRipper59. If you want to watch the entire video cast after the show is over, just be sure to become a member on the YouTube channel. Of course, the full audio portion of the podcast is available for free on all major digital platforms, or just visit forcanonsake.com.